Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you all here. My name is Anastasia Mann. I am the director of the program on New Jersey here at the School of Public and International Affairs, which operates with the good grace of our dean, Amani Jamal, who listened to some fired up, civically engaged graduate students in 2021 and combined that with her own insight that a public policy school ought to be paying attention to the work around democracy that's happening in its midst, understanding that there are affected communities with relevant experience and expertise, and policymakers and elected officials and advocates who know a lot about the issues that some of us mostly talk about in theory. So that is the work of SPIA in New Jersey. There's a sign-in sheet going around if you'd like to be kept abreast of the kinds of projects that we work on. Please share your information with us. Because we do a lot of interesting things, and we're interested in hearing your ideas about the kinds of things that we ought to be doing. And in that vein, I'm very delighted to welcome you to the second in a series of 3 talks on the New Jersey economy, which is an expansive conversation, putting New Jersey experts in conversation with people who think about developments at the national level, which have, of course, changed dramatically in the last week. Which I'm sure will be a major theme of this conversation. So moderating this conversation, and really the instigator, is Brandon McKoy, to my immediate right. Brandon is the president of the Fund for New Jersey. He was formerly the president of New Jersey Policy Perspective. In between, he was at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. He is a Jersey guy through and through. We can all feel very proud about that, as you shall soon. You'll soon join the legions of fans. And we couldn't be in better hands with a moderator than with Brandon. So please welcome Brandon, who will introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much, Stacy. And thank you to the SPIA New Jersey program. Thank you to the SPIA School, and thank you to Princeton for hosting us here today. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Again, I am Brandon McKoy, and I am a SPIA New Jersey fellow. And so it's a real honor to get to sort of engage the university and the community in this fashion. And I was recently interviewed by some local paper about, this series and why we're doing it. And I think in light of, the election and everything, I had said this before the election, but there's a lot of challenges that are facing our state and our country, of course, but we live in New Jersey, so I'm more concerned with our state maybe. And strongly feel, at least I strongly feel, that we're not going to successfully tackle those challenges unless we have informed citizens and an informed community, right? And so there's a lot of things that face our state. Our state is quite unique, stuck between New York and Philly, coastal state. A quarter of our population is foreign-born. We have a very robust and diverse, geology, if you could say, shore communities and rolling hills. I live out in horse country in Hunterdon County. Right? We have, really bustling urban centers. So we got a great state going on here, but there's a lot of challenges that we face in the future. And we've accomplished a great deal over the past, 10 or so years. We've passed a lot of very interesting and effective economic policy to really position us in a really great way. And there's an opportunity for us to really lead the nation. But I think sometimes we struggle to do so because we are in the shadow of New York and Philadelphia, right? If you live in North Jersey, all your news is ABC 7, and you get New York news. If you live in South Jersey, it's all CBS 3. You get Philadelphia news. I don't know what happens in Atlantic City. If anybody lives out in Atlantic County, let me know. But it's hard to get New Jersey news. It's hard to get news about what's going on in Trenton. And I think we suffer for that, but at the same time, we have a lot of folks, we are lucky to be in the location that we are. We're in one of the most robust economic markets in the world, if not the most robust economic market in the world. And we have a lot of incredible folks working at the national level. And as such, I thought it would just be important to have conversations that bring people together who are working nationally, working locally, and thinking about what's going to be best for us going forward. And so, to that end, let me introduce our amazing speakers who have given their time to be with us here today. And I'll start on my immediate right. She is the person whose book you picked up on your way in here. She is Natalie Foster. She is the president of the Economic Security Project, also a senior fellow at the Aspen Institute, and I said the author of The Guarantee: Inside the Fight for America's Next Economy. Thank you, Natalie, for being here. Next to Natalie, we have Nedia Morsy, somebody who I've worked with a great deal over the years, and an amazing leader. She's the deputy director of Make the Road New Jersey, and also a fellow SPIA in New Jersey policy fellow. Thank you, Nedia, for being here. And we have Ilyana Kuziemko, who is the co-director of the Griswold Center for Economic Policy Studies at Princeton, and a raft of experience at the federal level as well. And it's just really thrilling to have you with us. Thank you for being with us today. And so our first conversation was sort of a look back. It was this series is kind of structured in looking back, looking where we are now, looking forward. So the first conversation was about how has the economy changed over the past 10 to 15 years. The Great Recession was a really big turning point for the country, and just sort of things that were not nearly on the table then really are on the table now in a big way, policy ideas. And so that was a really robust conversation about all the things that have changed since then and sort of how we think about economic opportunity. But it would be weird to not at least kick off this conversation and give folks an opportunity to sort of reflect on how you were thinking about these topics, how you were thinking about economics, and what they mean at the national and local level, sort of in light of the results of the election last week. And so I'll frame that a little bit more sharply, but I want to give you space to sort of expand as much as you'd like to. Obviously there's going to be a lot that changes between now and the January, or at least when President-elect Trump takes office. A lot will change when he takes office. But the first 100 days is going to be a whirlwind. So could you reflect on what has changed, and then also are there certain things that you anticipate or think will be a really big deal that will set sort of the tone in the first 100 days of the administration? Natalie, you want to go first?
It's my pleasure to go first. Brandon, it's lovely to be here with you. Y'all, he's a national treasure who happens to be located in New Jersey, so you're very lucky to have him, and it's exciting to share the stage with you. I've been, like you, looking for the signal in the noise out there, and there is a lot of noise happening. And at the end of the day, where I fall down is that this was a campaign that was run on racism, on sexism, and othering. And I expect this administration, the second term of this administration, to govern like that. And part of what it revealed is that Americans are experiencing a deep sense of inequality, economic scarcity, and the lack of economic mobility, right here in the richest nation on earth, in the richest moment in history. And people are willing to take a bet on an alternative vision for their future, right, even at the expense of deep racism and well-rooted misogyny. And, President-elect Trump, Donald Trump, didn't actually just other. There's been a lot spilled on sort of the culture wars and then the economic side of things, but they were actually deeply connected. It wasn't just othering trans people. It was actually trans people will be using state dollars to get surgeries in prisons. And it wasn't just othering immigrants. It was immigrants are taking your jobs and they're taking houses, driving up rent. So it was connecting it to the economic precarity that people felt. Now, over the last 4 years, I've been very interested in a lot of the economic policymaking that I'll call post-neoliberal policymaking. Okay, this is the idea that government has a strong role in shaping markets and that we can name the outcomes we want to see. So we said we want to have a clean energy future, and we passed bills to build EV plants and battery plants, right here in the US. Private market did it, but it was government money that encouraged it, industrial policy. And I believe we were seeing the beginnings of a post-neoliberal economic framework, but it just didn't happen fast enough, and it wasn't told to people coherently enough to ladder up to a vision that would equal something drastically different than what people have had over really the course of my lifetime. There's sort of been one dominant way of talking about the economy, which is the economy is like the weather. There's nothing we can really do about it. It's something that just happens to us, and that we should have total faith in the market, zero faith in government, and people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But we're seeing something different now, and so I think that is what I am staying very curious about, trying to pull the signal from the noise about. And I think your question is about the first 100 days, what will be the priority? One of the big things I'm watching is the expiration of the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA. That was the tax regime that the first Trump administration passed in their first year in 2017 that locked corporate tax rates and tax rates for the wealthiest individuals at historic lows in this country, and it's the tax regime we've lived under since. Well, it expires next year. And so with the trifecta, the House, Senate, and this president, the Republicans will have to have a big tax fight on their hands. This unwieldy coalition that came together to elect Donald Trump will have a tax fight. And at stake is $7 trillion that really belong to this nation and should be spent on this nation, and it will be determined. Does it go to corporate America and individuals, or are we spending it on, healthcare and housing and all of the things that we need in this country? So that's one of the things I'm focused on, and all accounts, it will move quickly in the first, I don't know if it'll be the first 100 days, but I'll say 150.
Yeah, people say 100 days like this is some hard and fast rule, but yeah, it's a little bit more flexible than that. Thank you very much for that. Nedia, how do you anticipate or look at things?
Yeah, hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Nedia, and I actually met Brendan when I was 24 years old when we were organizing young people. Brendan is an organizer through and through. And at the time, there was a proposal on the table in the state of New Jersey to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour and exclude teen workers from it. And I was a youth organizer organizing other young people in the state of New Jersey, really trying to land the message that teen work is work, that if a 17-year-old is scooping popcorn and next to them is a 27-year-old scooping popcorn, that they should make the same salary. And we were young people organizing each other, organizing younger people. And Brandon went out of his way time and time again to use the work that he was doing at NJPP to support young people. So I think, Donald Trump has already committed, and the Trump administration has already committed to deport 1 million people in their first year. And it will have such an important impact here in the state of New Jersey. I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about the mass deportations, and then I also want to talk about the attacks on workers. I want to get this right, so I am going to read some of this. So many folks know I'm born and raised in New Jersey. I'm from Elizabeth. And New Jersey has more than 2 million immigrants. 1 million of them are naturalized citizens. 1 in 4 New Jerseyans have an immigrant family member, and 1 in 6 New Jersey children have at least one immigrant parent. And very often you hear folks talk about undocumented families, but we often forget that when you talk about undocumented families, that's not actually true, right? Your typical scenario are mixed statuses, or always your situation is a mixed status family where the grandparents are undocumented, they have a child that is possibly a DACA recipient, and then they have children that are US citizens. And when the Donald Trump administration was confronted with this point, his remark very recently was deport them all. And when he was asked how much this would cost, he iterated that there was no price tag on what he would do to make sure that he deported 1 million in the first year. Now, the impact that this has on our Jersey economy is huge. More than 20 immigrants make up 29% of New Jersey's labor force. That's 41% of all healthcare workers, both who are working in the cleaning industry, but are also our nurses. 33% of our nurse population are immigrants who live in the state of New Jersey. They make up our logistical work, our warehouse work, our farms. In Middlesex, Union, and Essex County, more than 40% of the labor force there are immigrants. I think New Jersey has made incredible strides in the first gubernatorial, in Murphy's first administration, to position itself as a pro-immigrant state. We have been able to expand driver's licenses for all. We've been able to increase the minimum wage. We've been able to provide expanded access to financial aid for undocumented students. And so we have been able to shut down some detention centers. But the Trump administration has made it very clear that they intend to make an example of states that are pro-immigrant and have sanctuary policies. And so it's something, it's definitely not a point to walk back the work that we've done. If anything, it is our responsibility now to build a multiracial democracy and cement the state as a pro-immigrant state. And the second piece I want to talk about just before I move on to the workforce is logistically, the state is set up to support mass deportations. We have the Port Authority, we have Newark Airport. We did shut down some detention centers, but there is Delaney Hall that has more than 600 beds. And so it is incumbent upon us to think very seriously, not only how are we throwing sand into the gears of a deportation machine, but how are we making sure that statewide and locally we are standing with immigrants and U.S. citizen children. The second piece I want to talk about is the impact that it will have in the workplace. So some of the stuff that, outside of Project 2025, the things that Stephen Miller and the Trump administration has committed to are ICE raids in the workplace, making it harder for folks to unionize or harder for folks to join a union. Elon Musk and Trump in a recent Twitter live said that striking workers should be fired. The National Labor Relations Board, we should suspect that it will be stacked with anti-union appointees who will side with employers in contract disputes and support businesses that stall union negotiations. In the first Trump administration, Trump made it a point to decrease the number of OSHA inspectors that we had. And so that more unregulated workers could be in the workforce, pay them less. We have a minimum wage nationally of $7.25. We should suspect that wouldn't move. The Trump administration was against hazard pay during the pandemic and did very little to protect essential workers, and may also be interested in continuing the misclassification of workers so that it would be difficult for them to unionize, right? So we're thinking about Amazon Flex, Uber drivers, gig workers, folks that fall out of the unemployment system. But here in the state of New Jersey, gig workers and undocumented workers have poured in more than $1.9 billion into the unemployment fund over the last 10 years, money that they were not able to access during the pandemic, money that we should suspect the Trump administration will make sure that working people will not be able to access.
So I feel like all the important points were already covered by the two of you, so maybe I'll take a slightly different tack, which is thinking about what can Democrats do in the next 100 days to best position themselves on these issues, and I guess maybe reflecting on how we got here and how the Democrats can shed their image of being a party with a very affluent base. I don't think it's unfair that some workers kind of look at the Democrats, Kamala for the first time won voters over 100K per household, and not be immediately convinced that they're the party that would support workers. Just a few omissions over this past period. The minimum wage did not come up hardly at all. during this most recent Democratic campaign, even though it's a great issue, even just politically. Forget even, its important benefits to low-income workers and families. It's as every time that the minimum wage is put on a referendum, it passes with like 70%, whether that's a blue or a red state. It divides this, as you mentioned, kind of unwieldy coalition that Trump has now put together, because gosh knows someone like Elon Musk is not in favor of the minimum wage. Sort of, the business owners that see themselves as part of Trump's coalition do not support the minimum wage. And so thinking about, are there ways that the Democrats can do some introspection on, getting working voters to trust them again? And I think there's been a lot of damage done in the past several decades. After the 2016 election, if I remember correctly, Hillary Clinton bragged that she had won all of the high-income counties that produce the GDP of this country, which I think was like a very divisive thing to say about people who are high versus low income. And so, before and I'm happy to talk, more about policy, and I know we will, but I think in the next 100 days, the Democrats really have to think about how best to communicate. It might be with changes in party leadership, but so far I haven't seen a lot of that, and that worries me because there are a lot of things coming up in the first 100 days or first year. Just adding to the concerns about the workplace, I mean, not only will Trump staff the NLRB with, anti-union appointees. I mean, there's court cases now in the federal system that are going to bubble up at some point, I guess, to the Supreme Court. I'm not a legal expert, that want to declare the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, that in 1935 formally instituted our system of labor relations and legalized union activity, want it to be declared unconstitutional. And I think you can look at the Supreme Court and think that could very easily happen. So I just worry that there are some major challenges ahead, which you guys have already highlighted. And I worry that the Democratic Party is not fit for purpose to fight against this. And some of these things would be very hard to reverse. So sorry to be kind of a Debbie Downer, but I wish I saw more reason for optimism on the group that's going to have to fight against Trump.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, it's going to be a challenging moment for sure. I teach a course at Rutgers, and some of my students are here right now. And I taught it earlier today. And as we said in the conversation that we had, hey, no sugarcoating anything. There's going to be a lot of change. There's going to be a lot of disruptive change. It's going to be a very hellish experience for a lot of communities. And then we sort of reflected on, well, what were the things that were not understood or were not communicated or were not appreciated that got us here, right? And I think there's a lot that has not been appreciated about how people are living their lives and how people are perceiving, the situation that the country is in and the situation that their communities are in. Sort of to that point, Natalie, in your book, it's called The Guarantee. You frame, basic income and other ideas as a guarantee, which is a very thoughtful and sort of, forward-thinking way to talk about the idea of what does your economy owe you as a citizen and as a resident, right? And just for folks to know, it's on audiobook now too. So if you prefer to listen, go get it on audiobook. I listened to it on my car ride, and I completed it very quickly. But I think about it alongside books like, there's Triumph of Injustice by Gabriel Zuckman, there's Whiteness of Wealth by Dorothy Brown, really trying to challenge us to think differently about how is our economy structured, who is it structured for, and is it doing the things that we think it should do, right, even to begin with. And there's been lots of changes in our country that you talk about, and you sort of make the point that, hey, we've changed things before, we can do it again. You actually start the book with a very interesting mission statement. You say, quote, "Make no mistake, keeping yourself and your people alive in this country is hard work, even though we are rarely compensated for this labor. People feel unsupported, overwhelmed, and alone. It is time to reimagine America as a country where people's basic needs are guaranteed. And so you highlight some past successes, you highlight some recent successes, and you've been on this book tour, you've talked to probably 1 million people, but I think folks are kind of a little bit disenchanted with the pace of policy change these days. And so what makes you hopeful that things can change, and what are you excited about that you think could change, hopefully, even with the recent changes in the political scene, things that you think could change in the next 10 years?
Yeah. Well, first I should say those words you read are actually Angela Garbus's words. She wrote the introduction to the book. She's an author and writes a lot about care. Her book is Essential Labor, and I was so honored she wrote the foreword to the book. And I'm so honored to get to drive around with you in New Jersey in your car with my little audiobook talking to you from the speaker. That's so nerdy of you. No, that's awesome. I'll get to the heart of your question. I believe that it's possible to build a better, more inclusive, and a fair economy that no matter your ethnicity, your race, your zip code, your religion, that there are the basics guaranteed in this country, and that it's not just pie in the sky, that we've actually seen steps toward creating some of these guarantees in the country, and that it's possible to do. And I will say it's feeling less possible right now, but this is a generational shift that we are part of. I think it is a generational work to build this multiracial democracy that can enact something like the guarantees. And one election here, one election there doesn't actually change it doesn't shift the fact that it's a generational fight. Mariama Kabe, who's an activist, says, hope is a practice and a discipline. And those are words that I really hang on to right now, because it is a discipline that we have to cultivate, to believe that better days can come. So let me just talk a little bit about the book. I call it the guarantee economy because unlike the scarcity-obsessed thinking that's marked the last 40 years of economic policy making, that we can build a floor that allows all of us to build lives of agency, of dignity, and freedom, and that the government has a role to play in making that a reality. And there's so much that stands in our way, but that the guarantee of housing, of healthcare, of higher education, of family care for the littles, for the elders. Brandon's a new dad, 2-month-old. He's probably looking at the price tag on affordable childcare, and thinking, wait, I'm spending your college tuition right now on childcare? And for disabled in our community, that family care is a really important part of this. The guarantee of good work, the guarantee of income, and a guarantee inheritance, known as a baby bond. And so I track all of those guarantees, not that they're the definitive lists, but instead they form sort of a North Star, and that there's been progress made at the city and the state level pointing in the direction of the guarantees. And that when the pandemic hit, we were able to scale so many of those to the national level. Let me briefly tell you about the guaranteed income fight, which I've been part of. So when we started this work, it was 2016, actually. Donald Trump had just been elected. There was a Republican trifecta in the Senate and the House. I want you to remember back to that, because we've been here before as a nation. And we knew that the size of the solutions being proposed did not fit the size of the problem that the economy had left, that most Americans were broke and in debt. Many Americans couldn't find, $400 in an emergency. They couldn't scrape it together if they needed to, and they were financing the American dream through debt. And so a guaranteed income became one of the big ideas whose time had come. And when we started talking about this idea, we were laughed out of rooms. We weren't taken seriously. And it would be conversation after conversation after conversation. It would be people taking political risks, like Mayor Michael Tubbs in Stockton, California, and Aisha Yandaro in Jackson, Mississippi, who would be the first to demonstrate the idea of a guaranteed income, right? In Stockton, it was 125 families who got $500 a month with no strings attached. We worked very closely with Mayor Tubbs to set up that project. And he demonstrated what it would mean if that were policy in America. People were less stressed. People had more time to show up for their families. They actually found work at higher rates because they had more time to invest in themselves. And the list goes on and on of what it meant for people to have the $500. And then that has grown. There are now a couple of pilots here in New Jersey, a number of mayors who've signed on to Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. It's gone all across the country, small towns, big cities. And when the pandemic hit, one of the first things we did was pass the expanded child tax credit. Now, the expanded child tax credit was a check that came to every parent in America's bank account with no strings attached, just debited in for 6 months. And it was a guaranteed income for families with children. So we have a national blueprint for how to do it. We just need the political will to get there. And so that's one example of how it's moved from the margins to the mainstream, the idea of an economic guarantee, in just the past several years. And that should, I think, give us some hope.
Just to pull a string on that a little bit, I used to think about the idea of, you hear a lot about risk tolerance for businesses, right? And then I would say, well, what's risk tolerance for families, right? And so do you see this in the same vein as like, well, we're building in risk tolerance for folks to be able to protect from economic precarity? Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, it's resilience. And I'll flip it around and say the idea of guarantees in America are not new. They exist for those who do business in America, right? Businesses exist on a guaranteed monetary system and court system and patent system and shareholder liability protection. Like, there are a number of guarantees to make sure that it works. So I'm arguing we should extend them to families across the country so that we can create the economic resilience you're discussing.
A little bit popular, I think, Ilyana, you had done a good amount of work on some big policy ideas in DC. If you think about like another big idea that you would like to see implemented, what would come to mind?
So I think for me, it's pretty easy, and that would be Medicare for all. So while I actually worked on the ACA, so I, had some personal sense of, accomplishment, I guess, when it passed. But in the years since, I have come to see it sort of with less rose-colored glasses. I think it, in some ways, entrenched a system of private health insurance that I think, we saw with the popularity, which shocked me in 2016, seeing how popular Bernie became. Medicare for All was the #1 issue of his campaign in 2016 and in 2020. And so to the extent you were saying about how maybe there has been a shift, and it's really hard to feel that way right now after the election, the idea that we could be talking about single-payer healthcare, which we definitely are more since 2016 than we ever did before, does give me some hope. So why Medicare for All? Why do I think that is, if I had a magic wand, the #1 thing I would do? So first of all, I think it's just more humane. I think that dealing with your private health insurer at exactly the moment when you are at your worst and most vulnerable because you or a loved one is sick is something that Americans are just accepting of, because I don't think they know that that doesn't have to be the case. I was talking to CC earlier today about a very sad situation where my mother had been diagnosed with a very bad cancer diagnosis, but she had just turned 65, and a good friend within 2 weeks also had a very bad cancer diagnosis, but was on good employer private health insurance. And the way they dealt with their disease and their treatment, my mom told everybody at work, she took temporary disability to become a full-time patient. Because he had to keep working to keep his health insurance, didn't tell anybody, would, go back to work 2 days after surgery. And the lack of humanity of that system beyond any economics, I think is first order just something that shouldn't exist. But as I'm an economist, I will talk also about the economics. It's really expensive. So just doing something that is a guarantee in the terms that you are using is actually much cheaper. We pay something like, I wrote down the number, 1.3 trillion every year. That's real money, like not just some kind of accounting thing. That is money that we spend to private health insurance companies, and we ask them to cover only a select part of the population. That part of the population that is non-elderly, non-poor, and healthy enough to work. And yet we are paying so much money every year to these private health insurance companies that are middlemen. Other countries don't do this. And I take some, again, I do think we're finally having this conversation even within my profession, which I think until recently was really, oh, it's complicated, we don't know if we could really do single payer. I think that even within the economics profession is changing a little bit. For example, my colleague Owen Zadar has a recent paper showing just how expensive this is because it's coming out of our paychecks. A current Princeton PhD student, Jessica Min, is looking at just these health insurance mergers and how expensive that makes our premiums and how that also affects our wages and employment. So again, it's one of these things where a simpler, more universal system would actually be cheaper, and we wouldn't be paying so much out of our, either directly in premiums or just deducted wages. So I do think it's one of these things that not only is it more humane, but it's actually better economics, and it would have these positive spillover effects on wages and employment as well.
Is that something that we see, I guess, movement at the state level for? Or could we see movement, or could we push for movement at the state level?
There's some, and Heather Howard is just, I don't know if Heather is here, but she's such a resource on this topic, so I would direct you to her. She'll know, especially I think at the New Jersey level. There are things that some states have done. So Maryland has tried to basically say, look, we're just gonna set prices at the state level. You wanna have a colonoscopy, this is how much you get reimbursed. As opposed to, oh, it's this private health insurance negotiates with the doctor, and the price, as you know, it's like you don't even know what the price is. So that is one thing at the state level I think you can do. I don't think you can do Medicare for all at the state level. I think taxes would be too high in the sense that it's easy to escape a state tax. You just move to Pennsylvania. So I don't want to sugarcoat like what the state can do when the federal government's not supportive, and that is because there's good economic reasons that a lot of the most tax-heavy policies kind of have to be done at the federal level because it's really hard to escape in a federal tax. You'd have to leave the country. It's really easy to escape a high state tax. You just move across state borders. So I don't want to overstate what New Jersey alone can do, but since you brought it up, one more thing I would mention. Most states, during this moment, exactly as you're saying, of like, oh, everything has to be private, the state can't do anything. Most states, including New Jersey, moved from having Medicaid, so this is the state program that covers low-income households, to a privatized system, where instead of just sending the bills to the state, doctors would interface with a private insurance company and blah, blah, blah. There were supposed to be these synergies and private efficiencies. Study after study has shown that those programs are more costly and appear to be probably worse for patients. So Connecticut actually reversed it. Connecticut got rid of private Medicaid and made it a single-payer state-level program. I just actually, in preparation for this panel, spoke to a friend I have who works in Connecticut Medicaid. He says by all measures, it's gone really well. But there is pushback because the private insurers want a piece of the pie. So now there's pushback to get it to be privatized again. But New Jersey could do that. New Jersey could look to the Connecticut model, say we don't need these middlemen. Literally all the state is doing is paying bills. In all cases, you're going to a private doctor or a private hospital. Why do we need the private insurer to interface in a program that the state pays for? So there are things that states can do. I don't think Medicare for all is one of them, but there's stuff that could be made better for the patient and cheaper for the state, that I think in this environment, we shouldn't be leaving those opportunities on the table. We should be pushing for them.
Can I say one thing on states? States are going to become incredibly important, always have been, but in this next phase as both bulwarks against rolling back progress and proving what's possible. I live in California, and over the past several years, we've actually expanded healthcare access to undocumented Californians. Not Medicare for all, but expanding the access to the existing system, which I think is really important to show what's possible.
One of the recent successes in New Jersey has been Cover All Kids, which is covering all kids that live in New Jersey regardless of status, and so regardless of their immigrant status. And so that's as recently as 2 years ago, we got that done. 16,000 kids have already applied, you said? Okay, so it's more popular than we thought it would be, right? But given, I guess, Nedia, I want to ask you a question about sort of where the rubber meets the road on, sort of how these things are resonating at the, at the ground level, right? I think New Jersey enjoys a profile of being, a liberal state, a progressive state, a forward-thinking state. We've implemented a lot of, pretty progressive economic policies for sure, and yet we still are one of the most segregated states in the country. We have a lot of, our schools are some of the most segregated schools in the country. We have the biggest disparities in incarcerated, individuals in the country. And so in a lot of ways, the progressive policies that we sometimes are so proud of are not showing up for all the residents of this state. And so, you've been a part of a lot of major victories, as you already spoke to, $15 minimum wage, driver's licenses for all, tuition equity. When you think about the things that are still holding folks back from really achieving sort of economic security in New Jersey, what do you think of the most?
The first thing I just wanted to share too is on the expanded child tax credit. In 2021, when the federal government decided that they would not renew it in 2022, New Jersey stood up and chose to continue to expand the child tax credit here in our state. Just like Brandon mentioned, we were able to expand NJ family cares for undocumented children under the age of 19. I say all that to say that New Jersey is so ripe for organizing. I think very often folks assume that New York is the most progressive on the East Coast, but New Jersey has time and time again set precedent on what a progressive state can do, what a pro-immigrant, pro-worker state can do. I think the other thing that's also important to remember, and I hope that you all will remain engaged, is the gubernatorial race will take place in 2025. New Jersey and Virginia are the only states that have a governor's race next year, and it will become a referendum for the Trump administration. How the rest of the country chooses to respond in a Trump moment will follow the lead of what happens here in the state of New Jersey next year. And so if you are a voter, if you live in New Jersey, it is so important to make sure that you're attending those candidate forums, you're plugged in, you're really driving home the things that are important to you and to your family. The two things that I feel like are the most important are housing and unemployment. What we saw during the elections, I think some strong examples is, if folks aren't familiar, the city of Passaic is in Passaic County, it's in North Jersey, very densely immigrant community. It actually has the highest population of Pueblan Mexicans outside of the state of Puebla. So incredibly dense immigrant community. And during this past election, remained blue by only 600 votes. Passaic County, which is just broadly, has some of the highest populations of Muslim Americans and Latinos, flipped entirely and went red. I was just with Adam Gordon, Executive Director of Fair Share Housing, earlier today, and he shared interesting data that in New Jersey, the communities that have felt the highest rent increases, those areas voted more Trump than they did Vice President Kamala Harris. And the Center for Popular Democracy just last year issued a report. They did a national survey asking working class people what is the issue that is most important to them, and housing came up time and time again. We see that in the state of New Jersey. Make the Right New Jersey is a member-led organization. We have community centers in Passaic, Perth Amboy, and Elizabeth. We are 7,000 members strong, which means that our members are dues-paying members. They pay $10 a month. That keeps our lights on. That allows us to pay buses so that we can go to Trenton, so we can lobby on the things that are important to our members. And housing is the thing that drives folks out. We have been able to stop more than 100 evictions in the last year across the 3 centers. We have helped form tenant unions in 2 of those cities, and we have strengthened rent control in each of those cities. And housing is a bread and butter issue that folks should make sure is a priority for them in the gubernatorial race. And what that looks like, or the potential of what that looks like, is rent caps at the state level. A long arc, right? Tenants will never be safe, or will never be in power, and will never not be disenfranchised so long as corporations own their properties. And so our long arc must be green social housing, but the way that we get there is that it is so important that we are socializing what just housing looks like. The importance of rent caps, the importance of tenants negotiating one-on-one with their landlords. And so, yes, there is a lot of work to be done at the state level, but in the year to come, it is so important that we're setting the example of what it looks like to sit at the table and to bargain directly with your landlord. The second thing that is so important is unemployment. We have seen so much, especially in warehouse and logistical work, how difficult it is for folks to find employment. We already talked some about how during the pandemic, many folks were excluded from unemployment. And unemployment is more than just providing aid when you're in a moment of distress. Unemployment also puts you into a system where you are supported to find your next employment. And so it is so important that we are creating a permanent unemployment program for folks that are typically excluded, right? You're talking about gig workers, undocumented workers, students who, when they lose their work, must be supported so that they can find their next work and keep our economy strong. I think it is incredibly important to make sure that we're framing our work around the issues and not in sort of broad strokes terms around save our democracy, Democrats forever. What we have seen is that the Democratic Party has abandoned its base and has abandoned its base for many, many years. And what we saw last week was a symptom of that, that working class people were hearing conversations about how the eggs were going to be cheaper and the gas was going to be cheaper, and that's where they went. And so we need to be talking to voters all throughout the upcoming year, whether that's you talking to your family or you're going to pick up a packet and you're going to start knocking on some doors, but it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we're talking to voters about the things that matter to them.
Love to have a chance to plug my students' PhD dissertation research. And to your point about the unemployment insurance system, I have a student who's working on Washington state data, but it would be relevant here as well, and is able to isolate certain requirements to get into the UI system. To your point, not all workers are covered by UI, meaning unemployment insurance. Not all workers are covered by UI. You actually have to qualify for UI, and there's certain groups that are excluded. So he looks at groups that are very similar, one in which you did get access to UI and one in which you didn't. So one concern among economists, the classic concern is that, just having these UI payments makes you less eager to find a new job. And there's some evidence that on the margin that might be true. But what he finds is that for this group of workers who don't get access to the system at all versus those who do, plus they get the payment, they actually find better jobs. So maybe they take a beat. They don't quite find that job as quickly as the one who's just super desperate with no payment at all. But he hypothesizes is that because you are getting connected to these services, that makes a difference too. Which leads to a second point, which is that in some other countries, UI, the unemployment insurance system, every rich country has a UI system. But in other countries, there's a more active, what's called an active system. The US is known as having a passive system where the UI, some states have some services, but mostly it is a check. In other countries, it comes with training and more aggressive help in terms of finding you your next job. So that's another thing a state, I think, could actually do, is have sort of a different suite of services that's connected with unemployment insurance. And then also, I think there's actually, my students' papers suggest there's evidence of making the UI system available to more marginal workers has positive social return, even just, for the budget. It actually saves the state money because they eventually find better jobs and are paying taxes into the system.
Oh, very fair points. So it's been a very wonky conversation so far, but I have a bit of a provocative question, because you mentioned at least, folks being interested in lower prices, and you mentioned gas prices. And I was driving here, and I saw gas for $2.70, and I was like, that's pretty low. So I asked this question in the last panel. I'll ask it to you. There's a broad, maybe not broad, I won't overstate the case, but there's a creeping concern that we might be in a post-policy moment, where, hey, we pass policies, they have impact, but people are not feeling the impact, or they're not seeing it, or they don't care as much as we might expect them to. And instead of, really making decisions based on the policies that are, shaping their lives, it's just this sort of communal social vibe, and we're making decisions based on vibes. And so, do you have concerns about us being in a post-policy moment? I do, but I wonder how does that strike all of you? Anybody?
The vibe session is what you are, yeah. Look, I think it's both vibes and policy. I think it's a yes and question, and what we just saw was one party that just focused on policy and another party that basically just focused on vibes, and I think that won out. Now, that said, tariffs, one of the most esoteric things in the economic textbook, were like an animating force in this election. When you talk to a lot of voters, particularly low information voters, many of them who voted for Donald Trump said they did so because of the stimulus checks, the stimmies. Okay, that's policy, but it's also the vibes around the policy. And I think it's really important to both deliver for people and shape the narrative and how we're delivering for people. And I think that is the work of, of social movements. And we have to do a better job of doing that where people are today. It's not the New York Times and not NPR, which is probably what you listen to in your car in addition to my audiobook. It's TikTok. It's podcasts. It's YouTube. Like, we've known this for a while, but I think this election has been a stark reminder that we've got to be where people are, talking about delivering for their lives.
At Make the Road New Jersey, like I mentioned, we are a member-led organization. Our members decide the campaigns that we move every single year. That looks like every single week, we have 7 committees. Those committees meet weekly. We average between 80 to 120 members at each of our committee meetings. Like I mentioned, majority Black and brown, immigrant, Spanish-speaking, identify as undocumented people. Over the course of the year, we are using those weekly committees as essentially focus groups, hearing from them what's going on in the community, what feels pressing. And then we host this thing that we called Asamblea. It's membership assembly, where we bring together almost 3,000 of our members every year. Up until that point, we've done about a month of popular education, where in those committee meetings, we've talked about, we've heard that these are the issues that are important to you. We've run some feasibility studies. That's the responsibility of our staff. And we're now going to present to you, if you decided that you wanted to work on a $15 minimum wage, if we decide that we're going to try to get permanent unemployment for excluded workers, this would be the work of that campaign. Members then are able to make an informed vote about what campaigns are important to them, and that decides the work for the remainder of the year. I share all this because many times when we're trying to think about the campaigns that we want to move on, we think about what is emotional, not just what is feasible, but what really makes people cry, rally, make them make the decision that they're not going to go to work, and they're going to get on that bus and they're going to go to Trenton, and even though they don't speak English, they're going to hand out flyers and they're going to talk to legislators about X, Y, and Z. And so it is so important that we are picking not only campaigns that will change people's lives, but that is easily communicated. and makes people get very emotional very quickly. One thing, a great example of that is during the Christie administration, there was an effort to pass paid sick. And what it looked like was that there was no interest in paid sick. The Christie administration was not interested, they didn't want to hear it, and so the work was to socialize it. And so movement people decided that what they would do is that they would go to municipalities and they would either put the question on the ballot or they would reach out to the boards and they would say, we want to pass a paid sick initiative in this city, where people who work in the city of Elizabeth must receive paid sick. In 2017, we ran the ballot initiative in the city of Elizabeth. In the city of Elizabeth, where I'm from, the mayor has been the mayor for 32 years. He was actually my first birthday party. He is one of the longest standing mayors, longer than Sharp James. And this is a testament to the line. But 87% of voters voted for paid sick. More folks voted for paid sick and left the line about voting for Mayor Bulwidge totally blank. And in that way, we were able to inspire Jersey City, Highland Park, Passaic to do the same work. And that work took 2 years, where we asked people and municipalities to sign on to paid sick. And by the time Governor Murphy had taken office, it had become so socialized that all of the Democratic candidates were talking about how important paid sick was. And so I think what is the missing thing between the policy and the vibes is that we are missing the part of education. When you move around things that a policy is a great idea and it's wonderful and it would really change people's lives, but people have not decided on their own that they're gonna champion this issue and they're going to cry and they're gonna put their bodies on the line for the issue, then there is a major disconnect. And what people are feeling connected to in this moment and passionate about is the fact that their rent is too high, and that if they have an emergency, they will not be able to pay the rent and they will be evicted. And that is the thing that's making people emotional right now.
Yeah, I think maybe as an economist, I can't believe in the vibe session. Like, I'm just a vulgar materialist. I kind of think people do vote for their self-interest. And so sort of pushing back on the vibe session, and of course it's not like there's zero role for messaging, and in fact, I do want to get to that at the end of what I'm about to say, but I don't think we should sugarcoat, like, the economy's been so great. We see, so, you know, even before COVID, so these are not just post-COVID trends. I mean, the US life expectancy has been in decline. I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, the rate of increase has slowed down. Of course, you know, we're in most countries it's slowed down. It hasn't gone negative. In the U.S. it has, and this predates COVID. And that's not a sign that things are going well. The work by Raj Chetty at Harvard has shown, again, pre-COVID, that in the U.S., it's a declining share of kids who do better than their parents in inflation-adjusted terms, you know, comparing age 40 of the parent to age 40 of the kid. That's not something that people are making up in their heads. And then just a final thing, and again, this predates COVID, the large share of adult children who live with their parents, and this goes to housing, of course, but also to this inability of kids to launch their careers. The decline in fertility. People feel like it's too expensive to have a family. So, I don't know, these feel pretty real to me. These don't feel like it's just vibes, which I thought was actually a not helpful talking point that some Democrats had. To the point about Messenger, though, I mean, I think we can't discount the fact that while Biden had, as you said, I do think Biden in 21, 22 had a sense that he tried to break away a little bit from what you might call the neoliberal consensus. But the fact that he chose to persist when he was clearly unable to communicate and be an effective messenger is something that we can't pretend didn't happen. And it really, you know, I think it could in the end kind of hurt the idea that, you know, oh, well, we tried industrial policy, people hated it. And I worry that, Biden's decision not to let there be a better messenger for that is something that, he is going to have to, history will judge him, I think, quite poorly for that. And it's especially kind of a bitter pill to swallow because I think some of the ideas he was trying out really deserved a better messenger than him.
So there's, I don't know if she's an economist, but a person by the name of Kyla Scanlon, who does a lot of really wonderful sort of popular messaging around economics. She has like a podcast and like a daily YouTube channel and does like short reels and whatnot. She's a very effective communicator on sort of what the economy is doing and how people are receiving it. And she makes a really good point on a pretty regular basis about, when you think about the tenets of the American dream, education, a home, white picket fence stuff, and just security, like being able to be economically secure. You can maybe put healthcare in that bucket. These are all rapidly becoming, if not already, have become luxury goods, right? Higher education, because it's getting expensive, is becoming a luxury good. A very, a nice, comfortable home is a luxury good. And if the tenets of the American dream are now all of a sudden luxury goods, then yeah, people will respond to that very, very sharply, right? So we're going to do Q&A. I'm going to ask one more question, but we're going to do Q&A, so if you have questions, think about them, and then we'll get to them for the last 20 minutes here. But I'm going to close with this question. I'm going to combine two questions into one. And so basically, it's, if you could, wave a magic wand. No, let me flip it. First, what do you hope could maybe get done, given the scenario that we have with the Republican trifecta, that would advance some of the goals and priorities that you hold? And separately, but maybe the same, if you could wave a magic wand to implement one policy, what would you want to see get done?
For New Jersey.
No, you can say New Jersey if you like, but New Jersey or national. Yeah, I don't know who wants to take that first. What do you think could get done in this moment?
I think one of the things that you will start to see very soon as we head into the 2025 gubernatorial race is you'll see grassroots organizations all across the state start to issue policy platforms. The things that they believe their membership is important, the things that they believe candidates should start asking on, things that they believe should be the litmus test for the next gubernatorial candidate. We, as Make the Road, were considering doing something very similar. But the results of last week should be an education for all of us. Like I said, we have been organizing in the city of Passaic since 2017. And the city of Passaic went blue by only 600 votes. And so how have we failed and how have we lost our base? And perhaps we are not asking the right questions, and perhaps we need to do a survey of zero. I say that for two reasons. I want to first share a story, and then the project that we will work on to hopefully move housing and unemployment. In the city of Passaic, the largest landlord is a man named Alex Perez. He is a resident of the city of Passaic, as was his father, and he owns more than 1,000 units in the city. He essentially sets the market. He also has this system where to sign a lease with Alex Perez means that you are participating in a pull system, right? So now your bank account is connected, and if you weren't there when there was fumigation, gonna take out $50. If there was some other fee or something else, gonna pull it right out. And so we have a member, her name's Monica Hernandez, and she is the mother of 5. And we saw, she came to us because she said, I'm set up on this pull system. What I've had to do is only open up a new bank account, only put exactly what I owe him in that bank. But I'm hitting a lot of overdraft charges because I'm getting texts that I was late on this or I was late here. He's taken me to eviction court. I'm not sure what to do. And we have been organizing on housing in the city of Passaic for about a year, 2 years. We were able to stop her eviction, and we are in the process of considering very seriously the possibility of rent strikes. And there are many folks in our membership who were proud of what happened last week. And so how do you reconcile that? Folks that are undocumented, at risk of mass deportation, and proud to have a president that says that they're going to save our economy, right? The stock market went up, I think it was like 3 or 4 points the next day, because that's how much faith people have in the economy now. And so, sort of what I said before about how we have abandoned our base. We are launching this project in the new year called Million Voter Project, where we will be talking. Our intention is to talk to 1 million voters by phone, door, text. I hope to knock on your all's door. And talk to voters about the issues that matter most to them, and in that way, keep folks engaged in 2025. Let's hear directly from 200,000, 600,000, now 1 million voters who care about X, Y, and Z, and in that way, create a very organic policy platform that is live and real all throughout 2025. If I could wave a magic wand, on it, well, that's not the question yet, right? I'm still on the. If I could wave a magic wand, we would update the registry of 1929, and we would put it up to 2025, and we would have citizenship for all. People should have the freedom to move, to stay, to thrive, to work, to transform. I don't believe in that borders should exist, and we cannot be free unless people can have a very clear line of the benefits that are accessible to them, and to keep families together, incredibly important. So citizenship for all.
The question is progress, right, that's possible over the next few years. I want to just talk for a second about what we saw last week in some deep red states, right? When the state of Missouri and Alaska were asked to vote on minimum wage, they showed up and it passed. They increased their minimum wages. Nebraska, 75% of voters in Nebraska voted for paid leave. Okay, so there is progress being made when people can vote directly on their economic self-interest. I would argue the 7 out of 10 abortion bills that passed were economic freedom bills as well, and people showed up to vote for them. Washington State was able to keep, they have a model that I think could be the model for how we would guarantee long-term care in America. They've built a social insurance program called Washington Cares that people pay a small percent of payroll tax into. And when it comes time for you or a loved one to need long-term care, which none of us know when it is, so we're pooling our risk together, then you can take money out of that and pay for it, because, of course, care is a two-sided coin. Both the wages for the caregiver need to be high enough, but the affordability for the families needs to be there. And so this program allows for that. It was on the ballot because a billionaire tried to actually take it down and spent millions of dollars to take it down, and it lost. So the measure lost. The social insurance program, which I think of as the blueprint, is intact and will give us a lot of data for how we can go forward. So this is where we're seeing progress being made. And if I could wave a magic wand, I am interested. I talked a bit about the guaranteed income work. I think of that as just like the beginning of the guarantees. One of the things I'd wave a magic wand for is around not just the income, right, and not just the wages, but the third leg of that stool is wealth. And wealth is where we see the greatest inequality in America today. We've seen what the obscene wealth can do in this last election. We know it is where we see the racial wealth gap, one of the greatest immoral stains of our time. The fact that white families, on average, have 10 times the wealth that the average black family has. And one of the ways you can start to deal with that is the idea of a guaranteed inheritance or a baby bond. Next week, you have Derek Hamilton here speaking on this very stage. And about 10 years ago, Derek and Sandy Darity at Duke wrote a paper talking about baby bonds and what they could look like in America. just a white paper that no one took, that people thought, oh, that's pie in the sky. Fast forward, we now have the state of Connecticut that has passed baby bonds. Washington, D.C., the state of California has passed a version of baby bonds. And there are a number of states running to be the next in line. Has New Jersey done this, team?
So our governor introduced the baby bond bill. It didn't go very far. I have my own opinions as to why. But the idea is in the drinking water.
Excellent. So it could be an issue in your gubernatorial race.
Cory Booker's a big proponent, so.
Cory Booker ran for president in 2020 on the idea, just seeing the arc of ideas moving so quickly from the margins to the mainstream. And so the thing about an inheritance is that it allows the child to start their life with a bit of risk capital, to get a degree, to buy a home, to pursue a business idea, the type of thing you can do if you're from an affluent family, that should be widely spread about and can do it through baby bonds. So that's my magic wand.
Awesome, thank you.
So starting from the more practical, like what could New Jersey do even in a Trump era, and then I'll get down to the pie in the sky. So I already mentioned that they could end the privatization of their Medicaid program. I think that is totally within their control and would actually save them money. The minimum wage, as we know, has been incredibly popular. The new sort of phase of that, I think, in progressive policymaking are sectoral minimum wages. So the minimum wage, is going to be an economy-wide minimum wage is going to be low, right? So it's not going to actually have a bite in a lot of higher-paid industries. But in order to also keep industries that are, higher paid and therefore not caught up in the minimum wage, but also sort of keep wage standards high, the idea is that there should be industry level or sectoral level minimum wages. These are very common in Scandinavian countries, and in fact, there has been some state experimentation in California and in Minnesota, I believe, probably a few others that I don't know. Similarly, an effective minimum wage for gig workers has been, I believe, passed in Massachusetts. Again, probably examples I don't know. So there are certainly things that New Jersey can do that don't involve any federal money. I mean, these sectoral wages are actually free. I mean, they're not even, you don't need state money to do it. It's just a labor standard. So I think that the state and sort of some progressive policymakers could look at things that are actually, kind of off budget, but that really, have shown to shape the labor market, at least in other countries. And again, there's some recent experimentation in other states. So I already said, I guess, my pie in the sky would be Medicare for all, but if I would even say something, Medicare for all, I think, is kind of a no-brainer. Every day, 10,000 people turn 65. They don't howl in fear that they have to join Medicare, right? They're all pretty happy. So I don't think that that's policy-wise some crazy thing that we've never tried. Something that is a little bit more of the untried that I'd be very curious to see is a federal guaranteed job. So I do think most people feel that work is part of their identity, and that it's, so I do think maybe that's kind of a old-fashioned statement, but I think most people feel that way. And I think an economy that doesn't just say, okay, well, everybody should be taken care of, although I totally believe that we should be having a welfare state that's more robust than what we have. But if the ultimate goal of a modern post-scarcity economy would be that we try to provide meaningful work for everybody and that everybody feels like they can contribute, that I think is more pie in the sky. I don't think we have a lot of past models of that. I don't know how that would look, but I feel like that idea is one I would like to sort of enter into the policy discussion, and that maybe we can have conversations about that and, maybe pilot programs or whatnot. But anyhow, that would be my pie in the sky.
Awesome, thank you. So, we do have the final, conversation in this series next, Tuesday? Next Wednesday, on the 20th, and a part of that conversation will be Derek Hamilton, who is sort of like one of the progenitors of baby bonds and some of these other big ideas. We'll also have Ryan Haygood, who's the president of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and we'll have another Princeton professor here who we're nailing down now. that will be a much more forward-looking conversation, much more pie in the sky thinking. And I think a lot of the genesis of that conversation is something that I heard Derek talk about, and actually Cornel West used to say. I think he based it on, or he didn't base it on, but it can be explained a little bit by an old Cornel West quote, where Cornel West says that justice is love in public, right? And so Derek oftentimes talks about love as a policy priority, and that can sound quaint or mushy or maybe a little weird. But what is the goal of all the things we're doing if it's not to make it easier for people to love themselves and their families and their communities, right? And to be able to really lead lives that are so full of joy and opportunity and health. And so that's going to be next week, and we'll maybe dig into some of these bigger ideas of, guaranteed job and all that type of stuff. But I think what's most important is being able to have these conversations and germinate these ideas and think big, because a lot of times I think here in New Jersey we get a little provincial and we just all do our thing and we don't travel more than 20 minutes away from home and we just are where we are. And so I thank you all for coming, for spending your time, for being so gracious with your expertise and your experiences. Thank you so much. And now we'll do Q&A, and I don't, where's Stacy? Where's Stacy go? Oh, okay. Does anybody have a microphone to run?
I'd like you to think about a few things that I jotted down during some of your comments. You mentioned...
I'm going to interject and say we
Oh.
have 11 minutes, so if you could ask one question, that would
Okay,
be great.
you mentioned incarceration. She mentioned education. Have you looked at where these inmates come from and what education they got from where they came from? Because I think you can see a direct connection with young people not getting the education they need, identified, passed on through the system, and can't read or write when they get into a prison setting. The issue of housing is that corporations are buying up some of the housing, and that's how some of the rents get raised. Because I got a call from somebody in California in a corporation wanting to buy my house, and I said I wouldn't sell it to you because I would sell it to someone local. You'd raise up the rents.
Well, so the question, you said education and people who are incarceration? Yeah, I actually don't know the answer to that. I know that we have organizations in the state like Institute for Social Justice and ACLU that definitely do look at that. New Jersey's actually done a great job of reducing our incarcerated population, but the challenge is that when you look at who's still currently incarcerated, it's just dramatically more people of color and more black men than it is white New Jerseyans, and that's due to a variety of issues that I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with. But definitely fair points.
Good evening. How are you all? My name is Queenie Collins, and I want to thank you, Brandon, for hosting this series. It's very educating. I have a question, and I know this was asked, and it's what can we do in this 100 days, right? I am a professional, a Black woman, and an upcoming leader. This whole process is painful, right? So how can we fix this gender gap in politics while at the same time responding to some of the reality around the economy?
Well, I think you should run for office. Women have to be asked 8 times on average to run before they believe they really can, but maybe we could get you at like 3 times. So count this as 1, Queena. I really believe that, though. I really believe that there's so much talent right now in the younger generations who are in office. You mentioned, Joe Biden being a spokesperson for industrial policy. The good news is there's actually a number of people, from Pete Buttigieg to Chris Murphy, to AOC, to a number of people who are up and coming and who are articulating a very different economics. So I hope you run.
I think a good example of
you're going to win, Queenie, is Andy Kim is our new senator-elect, and he won on a pro-immigrant, pro-worker platform. And so all the stuff that we're talking about here is not unsexy. Like, somebody who ran on updating the registry of 1929 is now our new senator, the first ever Korean American. So what we're talking about will move people. It is very unfortunate that the Democratic Party continue to move to the right, and it's hard to tell the difference between the two now. But if you stick to bread and butter, you will be fine.
Andy Kim won a fair amount more comfortably than Kamala won in New Jersey, so there's something to that.
Thanks very much. My question is directed towards Dr. Kuziemko. My overall question is, how can Democrats politically message in a resonant way, and whether you are optimistic or pessimistic about some of these trends that have harmed the low and middle class? I appreciate the assessment about the soul searching the Democratic Party must do to reorient policies, and more importantly, policy implementation in a way that's pro-labor. Skill-biased technological change has been increasing for the last 40 years. There's been real wage growth, but heterogeneity exists, right? That's, in relative terms, benefiting the richer. And, the incidents of deaths of despair largely overlap with those who have been the biggest relative losers in the U.S. economy, white, non-college educated Americans in places that are getting, really kind of eviscerated. And so this idea that Democrats are going to decrease grocery and prices, belies the fundamental idea of inflation. Isn't that kind of thing condescending? It seems like Trump's protectionism is not going to solve the problem when the skill premium appears to be on track to increase. Overall thoughts on messaging and your assessment of the trends going forward?
So I think that I made a little bit of a face when you said, skill-biased technological change has been increasing for 40 years. So skill-biased technological change, for those of you who've never heard the term, which I assume is most of you, is a term that economists have come up with. I'd say it first became very popular in the 80s and 90s. And it's really speaking to this idea that, the economy's like the weather, there's nothing we can do. It just so happened that the economy changed sometime in the 70s, and suddenly people with a higher education, their skills are in greater demand. And that sounds very plausible. There's very little direct evidence that that's the case. What instead the evidence is that people with a college degree have gotten paid a lot more than people without. There is a theory of the world is that demand for their labor had gone up. That's the skill-biased technological change theory. Completely other consistent theories of that increase in the gap by education is the change of institutions, the decline of unions, the spread of very rapid globalization, which is a policy choice. So I actually think the whole skill-biased technological change, there's nothing we can do message is really politically unattractive. So I was looking up for a lecture that I was giving. Just the way that, for example, Barack Obama talked about, if you don't get an education, kids in Dallas are going to be competing with kids in New Delhi. Education is going to be the only way you can forget thrive, just survive. I think that people want to say, look, you should have, this is not an attractive picture that you're painting for me, and that there needs to be some sense that the economy is not the weather. The economy is something that society shapes, and that I think is a message that has more empowerment and is more egalitarian. I think a lot of things that policy changed was not just the weather. There were decisions like deregulating Wall Street and allowing there to be much higher remuneration of people working on Wall Street. That was a policy choice. And instead, we've just taken this pattern of data, which is that college-educated people are increasingly paid more than less college-educated. This begins roughly in the late 1970s, and said, oh God, there's nothing we can do about that. And I think there were a lot of policy choices, the fact we don't increase the minimum wage, the fact that unions are a shadow of themselves in the US, but not in all other countries. And a final point against this idea that, again, there's nothing we can do, skill-biased technological change is just the way the world works. The rise, the college gap the wages paid to college versus non-college is so much higher in the US, that trend, than in other countries. Did other countries not also have technology? You go to Europe, it's not like, oh, they don't have technology. They have computers, they have broadband or whatnot. So I think that theory, which really I think captured the intellectual space within the Democratic Party, needs to be reassessed.
Anyway, this follows up on Ilyana's point. I think the biggest obstacle for some of your beautiful ideas is American culture, the narrative of the US, and that worries me because culture is very hard to change. So you describe these, the UBI examples. We know from Iran to Finland to Stockton, we know UBI works. Child tax credit, our neighbor to the north, all of the OECD have been doing it for years. We know it works. We did it here overnight. 7 million children stopped being poor. A year later, we canceled it. It seems to me the problem is not economic feasibility. It's convincing not just Trump and Hillary, but the American water, the American narrative. I've been in many rooms where Republicans and Democrats insisted on work requirements. Work requirements are an infantile idea that half the Western world knows is stupid. And in the American policy scene, it's a sine qua non. It has to be there. So what worries me when I hear all this, it's smart, it's right, but it's going against, and Andy Kim and other beautiful successes Nadia are describing notwithstanding, the American narrative just doesn't like that way of thinking, and that's what you're struggling against.
Yeah, I agree. Policy is downstream from culture. And that is why we have to support and lift up the meaning makers, the culture makers, those telling a different story. I frankly think, though, in 2016, you had two candidates telling a very different story about America than we'd seen before. You had Bernie Sanders and you had Donald Trump. And both of them were telling a story that looked different than the story of the past. So I believe we are in the midst of a transition. And so we should be looking for and supporting and lifting up the storytellers who are going to take us to that multiracial democracy that's possible.
So maybe to end on a note of optimism, I agree, the culture right now is not hospitable, I think, to a lot of these ideas, but I don't think the culture's unchanged. If you look at the New Deal era, the US actually led in many categories in terms of what we might think of as progressive policy. In some cases, we copied. There was a social insurance system that was stood up in Germany before it was done here. In other cases, kind of funny enough, if you look at the U.S. trend on, the share of the workforce unionized, we stand up a Wagner Act before Canada does. But for whatever reason, we saw the decline in the share of private sector workers unionized, and Canada maintained it. So I think looking at the New Deal era, at least, suggests that this culture is not permanent, not without the ability to change. But I do think that the culture now, is a challenge.
There's a really powerful theory of change by Mi Gente called "With the State, Without the State, and Through the State." And basically this idea that the inside-outside game is the real way that we change culture. And I think we have made incredible strides here in the state of New Jersey. I think just this past weekend, we organized a 400-person march in Jersey City in response to the election. It was less than 120 some odd hours after the election results. We had Attorney General Matt Plankin there, who was saying that he doesn't like suing the federal government, but that he will if he needs to. He traveled down to Texas in October to stand with DACA recipients. Congressman Rob Menendez Jr. was there, who said verbatim, "Over my dead body will they separate immigrant families in the city of Jersey City." We had Senator Raj Mukherjee, who said that his soul is from Latin America. But it is just a testament to the fact that we, inside out, we create culture. right? It is our responsibility to be outside of the Capitol and do our thing, and it is our responsibility to be inside of the State House, be in relationship with folks, and together, inside, outside, we make culture, and we will create the conditions under which others will feel like they need to respond.
Elder, I would just say I agree very strongly with what was said. I would just add one thing to what was already commented, which is that I agree greatly with what you're putting on the table, and I think I worry a lot about how a lot of the structures by which we exist now very much so advance an individualistic idea. Social media makes it so that our media diet is one of one. Whatever media you consume, you're the only one who consumes it in that way, in that fashion, right? And that makes it very hard to develop shared understanding, right? Shared stakes. We were talking in my class today about, the idea of folks commuting to work and everybody's, sort of sitting down with their AirPods in, doing their own thing. My parents developed their community by, whoever they went into. My parents worked in New York City, took the Midtown Direct from South Orange for, 25 years. The folks that they met on the train, those are their friends, right? And that's who we went to barbecues with and had birthday parties with. That's gone. And so I think we need to take seriously the impacts of that on things like citizenship and sort of commitment to one another, and what does it mean to have a multiracial democracy, because so much of the way that we live helps us avoid each other, right? We were told that these technologies will help connect us. They're not connecting us whatsoever. They're helping us avoid each other. And so I think we have to make a really concerted effort in a way that will probably make us very uncomfortable to actually engage one another, develop third spaces again. I know that sort of, is the in vogue thing to say, and everyone's reading Bowling Alone again, but, we need to be together, because there's no way that we're gonna understand each other, let alone give each other grace, if we don't know one another. Right. All right, we have one more question. There we go. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. She has the mic. Okay, she gets the last question. She's got the mic.
I'm not sure if it's on. So this is kind of a subjective opinion question for all of you. First, I want to say thank you so much for being here, and I'm extra grateful for the opportunity to sit here and to actually sit with everyone in the room. I live in South Louisiana. Like currently, I'm here visiting. I'm cat sitting for a friend. Very privileged opportunity, and I get to be on campus. I've been here almost every day the past few weeks. So a state like South Louisiana, where we're last in everything, we're backwards, we're behind. I experience hopelessness on a regular basis, because all of the bad things that we see about our country are manifested so deeply there and entrenched in the culture, as he said, and in the ideology. And so my question is, what advice would you give in terms of a first initiative, a first thing to tackle? What bite should we take first in trying to solve any of our problems or make a change?
Well, I would start with, and I don't know, they might have changed their name recently, but there's an organization in Louisiana called Louisiana Budget Project that in his leadership is Devontae Lewis, who is one of your more talented, he's now like, I don't know, he's one of the leading or top-ranked black elected officials in the state now. I think he runs one of the public utilities. But anyways, when I think about people who promote vision of community and togetherness in a positive fashion, I think of him. Right, so I would say engage with Louisiana Budget Project, but definitely engage with Devontae. I think he lives in Baton Rouge, but he's between Baton Rouge and New Orleans all the time. He's a very gregarious guy, and he is definitely the future of this country, right? But I think overall, yeah, it is definitely tough sledding, but you gotta find your people. You gotta find your community, right? Like you gotta find the folks that see what you see and care about what you care about, and get together face to face, and talk about it and say, okay, well, what's one small thing we can do together? Because momentum is a hell of a drug. And when you get momentum, you can do big things.
There's also Step Up Louisiana. They're an incredible organization. To Brandon's point, organizing is the thing.
Okay. Well, we're going to end there. Thank you all very much for coming out tonight, and hope to see you next week on Wednesday at 4:30.